Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson on growth in animals. And just to start us off, before we get into our main topic, there are 6 questions on the screen. These are based on previous topics that you've done. Please pause the video here, give yourself the heading, growth in animals, write down these 6 questions and then have a go at answering them. Take your time and click on play when you're ready to go through the answers. Okay, so let's go through the answers to those questions. So question number 1 said, what is a prokaryotic cell? And a prokaryotic cell is a cell without a nucleus. Give yourself a tick or correct that if need be. Question 2 asked you, what is a eukaryotic cell? And a eukaryotic cell is a cell with a nucleus. And examples of eukaryotic organisms would be animals, including us, or plants. Okay, question 3. What type of cell division forms 2 identical daughter cells? Hopefully you'll remember this from our previous lesson. If you've got 2 identical daughter cells, you've undergone mitosis. Give yourself a big tick for that. Question 4. In which stage of the cell cycle are the chromosomes duplicated? Well, the chromosomes are duplicated in the very first step of the cell cycle, and that is interphase. Remember, I peed myself and then cried. Interphase is the first stage of the cell cycle. Question 5. In which stage of the cell cycle, at the end of mitosis, does one cell divide into 2? And if you think back to our lesson on mitosis, you should be able to remember that the very last stage is when the cell actually breaks in 2 and the membrane forms around each of the new cells, and that happens during cytokinesis. Give yourself a tick or a correction for that. And the last question here, what term describes a cell that has 2 sets of chromosomes? And this applies to almost every cell in the human body, apart from the sex cells or the gametes. It's diploid. So give yourself a tick for that, or add that in if you didn't get that answer. Okay, so just a quick starter question here about growth in animals. So suggest how you could measure the growth of a kitten and explain your answer. So I just want you to pause here for a few minutes whilst you write down the question and your answer. And when you're ready, click on play and we'll have a look at an ideal answer. So an ideal answer for the first part of that question would be either measuring the mass of the kitten once a week or once a day or maybe once a month, or measuring the length maybe from the head to tail every week, day or month. If we look at part B of that answer, you can see that the exam board want you to say that you're going to measure it repeatedly over a time frame. So it could be days, weeks or months, it doesn't really matter. But the important bit is that you're measuring it repeatedly. And the point of this is that you're trying to show an increase or a growth of the animal. So measuring it once would not get you both marks. And you can explain this by talking about how the organism, the kitten in this case, has grown and got bigger because the number of cells has increased. The cells themselves haven't got bigger, but the organism, the cat, has undergone mitosis and increased its total number of cells. So in biology, when we talk about growth, we're actually talking about an increase in either the size or the number of cells. Although we almost always mean the actual number of cells has increased, and you should know now that increasing the number of cells in an organism happens because of mitosis. So in exactly the same way that you could measure the growth of a kitten by measuring either its mass or its length, you can also track the growth of a baby by measuring the mass of the baby on a weekly or monthly basis, or the length of a baby. We also take measurements of head circumference to indicate healthy growth. Each of these three ways of measuring growth in babies gives us useful information about how well the baby is growing and developing, and can indicate whether there are any growth problems with the baby. So if we measure the mass of a newborn baby every month, we can plot its mass on a graph which we call a growth chart. And you can see an example of a growth chart on the screen now. You'll notice that on this chart there are lots of different lines, and this looks a little bit confusing. Each of those different lines is called a percentile curve. And the easiest way to think of this is to look at the 50th percentile. So if you find the line on that graph that is labelled on the right hand side 50th, we can say that 50% of babies will grow and develop below that line, and 50% of babies will go at or above that line. In a similar way, if you find the line on that graph that says second near the bottom, this line shows a slower growth rate, and only 2% of babies would grow at this rate. 98% of babies would grow above this rate. So by using a growth chart like this, we can compare the growth rate of a baby to the rest of the population. The only information we would need would be the age of the baby in months and the mass of the baby in kilograms. So here's an example of an exam question using growth charts. This question is asking you to find the mass of a 4-month-old boy on the 75th percentile curve. Now, in order to do this successfully, the first thing you're going to need to do is ignore every curve on that graph apart from the 75th percentile curve. So find the 75th percentile curve, and that blue line is the line we're going to use to find our answer. The next thing we're going to do is, looking along the x-axis along the bottom, we're going to find 4 months, because that is the age of the boy whose mass we want to look up. Once we've found the 4-month line on the x-axis, we need to travel up the graph until we meet the curve for the 75th percentile. Once we find that line, we then move across to the left to the y-axis, and we can find the mass in kilograms of a 4-month-old baby on the 75th percentile curve. So I want you to pause the video for a couple of minutes and see if you can find 4 months on the bottom, and then go up to the 75th line and read the mass off the y-axis. Okay, so the answer you should have got is 7.5 kilograms. And you can see on the graph now, we've got a line from the 4-month point on the x-axis going up till it touches the 75th percentile curve, and then across to the y-axis where we find the answer 7.5 kilograms. Here is another question which is essentially exactly the same question. It's asking you to find the mass of an 8-month-old boy who's on the 25th percentile curve. Now remember, this time you don't want to use the 75th curve that we did in the last question. You need to only pay attention to the 25th percentile curve and ignore all of the others. So pause the video here, see if you can find the mass of an 8-month-old boy who falls on the 25th percentile curve. So in this question, the answer is 8 kilograms. If we find 8 months on the x-axis, move up the graph until we find the 25th percentile curve, and then move across to the y-axis on the left, you'll find the answer 8 kilograms. Okay, we're going to move on now, and we're going to talk about cell differentiation. So we know that all animals develop from a single cell, and we also know that animals grow using the process mitosis to duplicate their cells and increase their mass. In our previous lesson, we saw that cells produced by mitosis are identical to their original cell. However, if we want to build complex living organisms like humans, having all of our cells identical isn't any good. The new cells that are created using mitosis change and become specialized so they can perform different functions. The process that changes normal unspecialized cells into more specialized ones is called differentiation. There are many different types of specialized cells in a living organism. Each of these different types of specialized cell is adapted in a different way that allows it to carry out its own specialized function. We're going to take a closer look at the job and the features of a specialized red blood cell. And we'll start by watching a short video.
So I'm sure you know that blood is pretty important, right? I mean, if you see that someone has lost a lot of blood, it's not usually a good sign. But why? What is so important about blood? Well, in the next few videos, we will show you just how special this incredible red liquid is. Your blood is made up of plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. In this video, we will look at the red blood cell. These are also known as erythrocytes. And you have a lot of them. In fact, in just one drop of blood, there are about 5 million red blood cells. They only live for 120 days in your bloodstream, and every second your body makes 2.5 million new red blood cells to replace old, dead cells. Okay, I hear you say, that's great. We have lots of these cells, but what do they actually do? Well, they have one very important function, and that is to transport oxygen around the body. Every cell in the body needs oxygen in order to carry out aerobic respiration and release energy. We take oxygen into our lungs every time we inhale, but something has to pick up that oxygen and carry it to all the other cells in the body. And that is the job of your red blood cells. And you know what? They do a very good job of it. And that's because they have all the special adaptations needed to carry out this very important role. Firstly, they have a biconcave disc shape. This basically means that they look like a jam donut that has been squashed in the middle. This gives them a large surface area to absorb oxygen very quickly. Another adaptation is that they have no nucleus. Think about it. There would be no use in a red blood cell taking up extra space with a large nucleus when it could use that space to carry even more oxygen. An amazing adaptation. But the best adaptation of all is that they contain the transport protein hemoglobin. In the lungs, it binds with oxygen to become oxyhemoglobin. As the red blood cells travel around the body, they release this oxygen from the oxyhemoglobin to the respiring tissues. But there is more. Oxyhemoglobin is also what gives the characteristic red colour to the blood cells. You can see that red blood cells are very special cells. Did you know one of the world's biggest killers, the malaria parasite, invades and destroys blood cells, and that's why it's such a serious disease to get. And yet, although they are so important, red blood cells make up just one part of your blood. Of course, we've got more lessons for you on the other parts. A quick question to see if you've been paying attention. How many red blood cells has your body made during the last 2 minutes of this video? Pause the video now while you work it out and click play when you're ready for the answer. The answer is 300 million cells. Give yourself a pat on the back because that's a lot of cells.
If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Comment below if you have any questions. Why not check out our FuseSchool app as well? Until next time.
Okay, your final task this lesson is to return to Go for Schools and use the link to complete the exit quiz about today's lesson. Make sure you complete the final quiz so I know that you've completed the lesson.